But, we're all focused on the Strait of Hormuz, which is the critical choke point in this conflict at this moment. The Strait of Hormuz was open before this happened. So we're blockading the blockade that came into existence because of the thing that we did. So we're essentially just trying to undo our work.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So good to have you here again. Today we are jumping into a segment from the 5 on Fox News, where the panel is breaking down the current state of the Iran conflict, the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, and what a potential deal might actually look like. And the whole table is basically taking a victory lap until Jessica Tarlov cuts through the noise and drops one of the sharpest lines I have heard on that show in a while, completely flipping the narrative on its head. Please do yourself a favor and stick around all the way to the end, because the final stretch is where everything really snaps into focus, and I would genuinely love to know where you are tuning in from today. So drop your city or country down in the comments. I read every single one, and it always makes my day. All right, let us get into it.
Meanwhile, the Democrats are still doubling down on their desire to see Iran win this conflict. Virginia Senator Mark Warner is now suggesting that America's the bad guy here.
In so many ways, 46 days in, America is less strong, and the Iranian regime, which is, by the way, more radical than it was before, can, on some level of truth, say, we just took on America and Israel and fought them to a tie, although maybe even more than a tie. Looking at how we are viewed around the world, we have spent 75 years trying to say, with all our flaws, and God knows we've got a lot of flaws, we were the good guys. We don't have that claim anymore.
A lot of Iranian talking points proliferating, Jesse.
The United States has never been stronger, and I've never been more proud of the Navy. We came in, they said there was a quagmire. They said we had no strategy in the strait, and we took 2 missile-guided destroyers and sailed them right up the gut, right down the middle, miles off the coastline, and Iran didn't do anything. They said they were going to do something. They did nothing. They sent 1 drone. We knocked it out of the sky. Right now, we're doing some demining operations, and guess how many mines we found, Kaylee? 0. The Iranians were bluffing. So we're going to continue the demining operations to create a little safe passageway for these other foreign tankers. And once that's over, we do a few escorts and we hand it off to the NATO navies. Iran is closed for business completely. They can't sell anything to anybody else. They can't buy anything from anybody else. And if you notice, there's not a lot of stuff built in Iran. Okay, so especially after we bombed all their steel and petrochemicals, they're done. They're going to lose about $500 million a day. All their oil wells are going to probably blow up in about 3 weeks. They can't store it. And China can't suck up all that cheap sanctioned oil anymore. And sooner or later, Xi Jinping is going to call the gay Ayatollah and say, no mas. And that's what you see happening here. And right now, we have 3 aircraft carriers about to be in the region. 10,000 more Marines who can either do boarding, seize card, coastal assaults if they get cute in negotiations. And negotiations are pretty simple now. The only leverage they have once they lost the strait is uranium. And it's buried under the rubble. We're keeping a close eye on it, and they haven't moved it yet. So the market loves the blockade. We've already recovered all the losses since the start of the war. The S&P just hit an all-time high today. Oil futures are in the 80s for June delivery, and gas here at the pump is down from last week's highs. I'm sure it'll go much lower. I'm not saying this thing's over, but this does look like, and anything can happen, that Trump is about to stick the landing, and we'll just pray it happens.
Okay, this is where I have to stop the video already, because Kaylee opens the segment with this line, and I want you to really hear it. She said this: meanwhile, the Democrats are still doubling down on their desire to see Iran win this conflict. Excuse me? Want Iran to win? That is not analysis. That is not news. That is a smear dressed up as a headline, designed to shut down anyone who dares to ask a question about American foreign policy. And the moment she framed it that way, you already know the rest of this panel is not a debate. It is a cheerleading squad with a chyron. And then they rolled the Mark Warner clip, and I swear Warner said something that every American should sit with for a second. He said this: America is less strong, and the Iranian regime is more radical than it was before. They started trying Then he added this: "We spent 75 years trying to say we were the good guys. We do not have that claim anymore." You have to understand how huge that statement is from a sitting United States senator. That is not a talking point. That is a warning label, and the panel just waves it off like he is reading from an enemy script. Here is what people do not realize. The entire strategy being celebrated on this show is a strategy of pressure, blockade, bombing, starvation of an economy, and the measure of success is whether a regime caves. But history has a very consistent lesson here. When you corner a regime that already does not care about its own people, the people starve long before the regime blinks. We saw this with sanctions on Iraq in the 1990s, which are widely documented as having caused massive civilian suffering while Saddam stayed firmly in power for another decade. The pattern is known, the pattern repeats, and somehow we keep being told this time it will be different. Then Jesse jumps in with his victory lap, and at one point he casually drops this: "Sooner or later, Xi Jinping is going to call the gay Ayatollah and say namas." That is the level of the commentary. That is the seriousness being brought to a conflict involving aircraft carriers, Marines, and a potential nuclear crisis. Slurs and slogans. This is why the rest of the world is watching and wincing.
You know, and Dana, you did have Caroline Levitt today say nothing is official until you hear it from us, but we feel good about the prospects of a deal.
Well, I think that the economic pressure, obviously, it's just like here, right? What people think about their pocketbook. And so that's true of the Iranian regime as well. So because they don't care about their people. The people basically had no money. They were starving. And the Iranian regime said, "Oh, how about we give you $7 more a month?" And the people said, "Heck no." And then when they protested, and then we know the rest of the story, unfortunately for them. But this actually hurts the regime. Because then, as Jesse was saying, if you're losing $500 million a day, like you can't operate, and that it doesn't take very long to hurt a regime in that case. I do hope that if they decide to meet, that it's not meeting just to meet, that it's meeting to say, you are going to agree to our terms and we will meet with you. And if they're just going to come and try to drag it out, I wouldn't meet, and I would keep the pressure on, as I think that they are saying that they would be willing to do. I think President Trump on Sunday, this is just 3 days ago, called into Maria Bartiromo's show and said, the gas prices might be lower, they might be the same, they might even be higher. And then today he said they're definitely going to be lower. I don't know if I would promise that, but the trajectory would be, yes, that would seem to be the case. But one last point here on American energy independence that we enjoy versus what other countries have to deal with is that some of them are saying, being told, work from home, don't drive, turn out your lights. They're figuring out a way to do everything they possibly can all throughout Asia because they are more dependent on the energy from this region. It's more proximate to them. China gets 73% of its oil from the region. So it does hurt them as well. So there's incentive to try to get this done. And if China is doing anything, hopefully they are telling the Iranians, get with the program.
Yeah, and the blockade, to Jesse's point, does appear to be working. We gave you the numbers, but I want to play this from CENTCOM. CENTCOM put this out, and this was a warning sent to the Iranians. It's really interesting. Listen to this.
Do not attempt to breach the blockade. Vessels will be boarded for interdiction and seizure, transiting to or from an Iranian port. Turn around and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force. The whole of the United States Navy is ready to force compliance. Now.
Jessica, the reason I play that is because previously the Iranians have not understood words. They didn't understand Joe Biden saying don't, hence October 7th. They didn't understand Barack Obama and the deal, hence the violation of the deal. They understand that because you have a president that's used hard power and used force.
And this is the part that really blows my mind, because Dana Perino, bless her, she accidentally does the liberal work for us. She sits there and she says this. On Sunday, just 3 days ago, he called into Maria Bartiromo's show and said gas prices might be lower. They might be the same. They might even be higher. 3 days later, the story flipped to definitely lower before the midterms. And Dana on live television says this. I do not know if I would promise that. A conservative Fox host just publicly flagged a flip-flop in real time and moved on like nothing happened. You have to understand what you just watched. That is the entire strategy laid bare. Say whatever lands today. Say the opposite tomorrow. Count on your audience not remembering what you said 72 hours ago. and count on the host defending you to pretend they did not just hear it themselves. If this were any other leader on the planet, that same panel would be calling it propaganda, because it is. Then Kayleigh turns to Jessica with this line, and honestly, I had to pause. She said this, Jessica, the reason I play that is previously the Iranians have not understood words. Words? Are we really going there? The argument being made out loud on a major American network is that diplomacy is for weaklings and that real leadership is only measured in bombs dropped and ships boarded. That is not strength. That is the mindset that gave us the 2003 Iraq invasion, which is now openly documented in the official Iraq inquiry in the UK as being based on flawed intelligence and cost hundreds of thousands of lives for a threat that was not there. And here is what the panel refuses to say out loud. The Iran nuclear deal, the one they keep mocking, actually had inspectors on the ground, cameras inside facilities, and verified limits on enrichment. That is documented. When it was walked away from, the enrichment went UP, not down. So when Kayleigh says the Iranians do not understand words, what she is really saying is that she does not understand the receipts. The receipts show that talking worked better than bombing at keeping that program boxed in. And that is not a liberal opinion. That is the inspection record.
Sure. Listen, I hope that we end up with a very sparkly deal and that everybody on our side gets what they're after and that we can return, frankly, to some of the original goals that we had before the goalposts were shifted very dramatically down to what Secretary Rubio was talking about, which I call the skinny goals, like the Skinny Inflation Reduction Act. And maybe that's possible. But at this point, it sounds like you're still pretty far apart with the 5-year offer from the Iranians, apparently that we asked for 20 years, which wasn't even satisfactory for President Trump in terms of the enriched uranium. So I wish you the best of luck, right? And for the people who are going in, and I think Dana makes a really good point that you shouldn't go just for the sake of sitting there and looking like you're trying to get to a deal. You should keep up force and pressure and make them really serious when they do come to the table. But, we're all focused on the Strait of Hormuz, which is the critical choke point in this conflict at this moment. The Strait of Hormuz was open before this happened. So we're blockading the blockade that came into existence because of the thing that we did. So we're essentially just trying to undo our work. And Donald Trump sits there with Maria Bartiromo and he says, it'll take them 20 years to rebuild their program. Do you remember what people were saying about what happened just over the summer with Fordo, right? Their nuclear program was obliterated. There was no possibility of rebuilding it. And then just a few months later, we were back to they're going to have, 11 nuclear bombs in a matter of weeks or whatever it was that Bibi Netanyahu was saying. So we're obviously getting some mixed signals here about what they can do. Mark Warner, the point that he's making about the regime, I think is important to consider because we're not doing regime change anymore in the way that the Israelis were hoping to. It wasn't an ideal scenario to have the Ayatollah's son take over, who we all agree is more of a hardliner. But the Wall Street Journal did a deep dive piece today on what the regime will look like afterwards. They have the former head of the Iran desk for the Israelis who said the war changed the regime and not in a good way. We created a reality that is worse for the Iranians that they were facing before the war.
And now we get to the moment where Jessica, the one liberal voice at that table, finally gets the floor, and she lands this. We are blockading the blockade that came into existence because of the thing that we did. Then she adds this. So we are essentially just trying to undo our work. Oh my goodness. That is the entire foreign policy of the last 45 days, summarized in one sentence on their own network at their own table. We created the fire. We are now celebrating the firefighters. And nobody at the table wants to talk about who lit the match. And this is the part that really gets me, because Jessica then reminds everyone of what was said this past summer. She said this: their nuclear program was obliterated. There was no possibility of rebuilding it. And now, a few months later, the same people are saying Iran is weeks away from 11 nuclear bombs. You cannot have both. Either it was obliterated or it was not. Either the mission was accomplished or the crisis is worse than ever. Pick one. You cannot sell victory and emergency at the same time, but that is exactly what is happening. And then she drops the real gut punch, citing a Wall Street Journal piece quoting a former Israeli intelligence official. She said this: "The war changed the regime, and not in a good way." Think about that for a second. The people who were supposed to know the Iranian regime best are on record saying the regime that exists now is harder, more paranoid, and more dangerous than the one that existed before the bombs dropped. That is the measurable outcome. That is the score on the board, and the panel wants us to throw a parade. You have to understand, real strength is not dropping bombs and then demanding applause for putting out the fire you started. Real strength is knowing the difference between a headline and a result. Gas prices come and go. Market highs come and go. But a regime that has been radicalized by war sticks around for decades, and ordinary people, on both sides, are the ones who pay for it. That is the part the victory lap crowd will never tell you. So, what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.